Kate to do. To enable your microphone, please press the mic button, which will follow the cue, and the microphone will light up red at the top to indicate that this has happened. Please remember to press the middle button when you have finished speaking, as it is particularly important that all members use their microphones so that the audio can be picked up through the live stream. In the event of a fire alarm sounding during the meeting, please stand and follow the meeting administrator to the evacuation point outside of the building. Firstly, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Gardner, Dew, Motwell and Branch.
Thank you very much. We move on to item 1, which is to approve the minutes. Do we all agree these minutes are a correct record of the meeting held on the 19th of February 2024? Commissioner? We will move on to item 2, members' interest. Are there any members that need to declare an interest? I need to declare an interest on item number 3B, as I am ward councillor. Thank you. We will move on to item 3. 3A is an application in Perry, and I'll hand over to our planning officer, Maria Rosamond.
Good evening, everybody. So, share the screen. So this application is for the construction of 4 dwelling houses and alterations to the existing vehicular access on the land adjacent to 26 West Perry in Perry. This application has been brought before members as the Planning Officer's recommendation of refusal is contrary to the Parish Council's recommendation of approval. The reasons for refusal relate to design and impact to the character and appearance of the proposal, as well as harmful impacts to the setting of nearby listed buildings. A further reason for refusal relates to residential amenity. As set out in the late representations report, reason for refusal 4, which related to the emission of a unilateral undertaking for wheeled bins, has been withdrawn as the applicant has provided this document to the local planning authority, and officers therefore withdraw this reason for refusal. So the site shown on this map hatched in black is considered to be located in the built-up area of Perry. In terms of constraints, the application site falls within close proximity to some Grade 2 listed buildings, most notably Treetop Cottage to the south and number 29 West Perry, which is located west of the site across the road. West Perry does not have a designated conservation area. The site is in flood zone 1 with low risk of groundwater and surface water flooding, and there are no other site constraints. This is an aerial view of the site with the site outlined in yellow. You can see the site is irregular shaped, comprising of open scrubland and sporadic trees. The site lies mainly to the rear of the detached dwelling at number 26 West Perry. The site is surrounded by residential development with Armstrong Close to the north and Whitehall Way to the east. The site's access is from West Perry to the southeast via a driveway located between numbers 26 and Treetop Cottage to the south, which is number 30. This location plan shows the site edged in red with the land owned by the applicant outlined in blue. So it's acknowledged that the site has previous approval for 2 dwellings following outline permission in 2007, which was followed by an approved reserved matters application in 2010 for the appearance, landscaping and scale. It should be noted by members that since this application has been determined, the National Planning Policy Framework came into effect in 2012, the HDC District Design Guide has been updated in 2017, and a new local plan was adopted in 2019. No evidence has been provided to officers that the works of these permissions have begun, and it is therefore considered that these permissions have lapsed and planning permission is required for any residential development on this site using up-to-date local and national adopted policies and guidance. The proposal is for the erection of 4 1.5-storey dwellings and alterations to the existing vehicular access as shown on this block plan. The proposed dwellings would face inwards towards each other and would be accessed via a buff block paving drive where each dwelling would have 2 off-road parking spaces. Alterations would be provided to the access, including widening northwards to allow for safe access and visibility displays. This is the site overlaid onto the aerial view. Note the proximity of plot 4, which is red, to the listed buildings. Oh, isn't it? So there's the listed building to the immediate south. Oh, it is on a covering up slide, so I can show you that one. And the proximity to the existing dwelling at West Perry. So these are the proposed plans and elevations for plot 1, which is a 1.5-storey detached pitched roof dwelling with flat roof front dormer windows, flat covered canopy to the front and single-storey projection to the rear. The dwellings would be constructed in grey cladding, buff brickwork and slate roof. These are plots 2 and 3, which are semi-detached 1.5-storey pitched roof dwellings with lean-to front canopies and dormer windows on the front elevation, constructed in grey cladding, buff brickwork and slate roof. And this is plot 4, a 1.5-storey detached pitched roof dwelling with lean-to covered canopy to the front and 2-storey gable projection constructed in black cladding, buff brickwork and red pantile roof. This is a plan showing acceptable vehicle tracking for fire service and vehicle refuse vehicles. So these are my site photos. So this is where I'm standing on the opposite side of the road looking onto the access. I'm standing at number 29 West Perry. And this is me standing at the same position looking right towards the south. This is Treetop Cottage that you can see there behind the trees. And this is me standing at the access of the site looking onto 29 West Perry, which is a grade 2 listed building. And this is me standing at the same position looking at the dwelling at number 26. So now I'm standing more central in the site and I'm looking on towards number 26 West Perry. And this is me sort of panning around, standing at the same position. This is number 24, so I'm going clockwise. And then this is looking north to the side of the site, towards Armstrong Close, and to the rear of the site, looking onto Armstrong Close again. And again, I'm looking, sort of panning around the site. This is towards Whitehall Way, and again, towards Whitehall Way. And this one here, I'm at the back of the site, looking back onto the access with number 26 there in white render. And this is me looking into the site to the left onto Treetop Cottage. So the first reason for refusal relates to design, as outlined in paragraph 722 to 8.28 of the Officer Report, which concludes that by virtue of poor design and the proposed two-storey height, the proposed development would not contribute positively to the character and identity of the area and would not successfully integrate with adjoining buildings, the routes and spaces between buildings, topography and landscape. Contrary to policies at LP11 and LP12, Parts A and B of the Huntingdonshire Local Plan, the placemaking principles set out in Chapter 3 of the HDC District Design Guide and paragraph 135, Parts A to D of the NPPF 2023. The proposal would therefore have an unacceptable effect on the character and the immediate locality and the settlement as a whole, contrary to criterion C of policy LP9 in the Huntingdon Local Plan. So the first concern raised by officers in terms of design is the lack of subservience to the dwellings on West Perry. As you can see from this street scene drawing, while the proposed dwellings are 1.5 storey in nature, the ridge heights would be comparable to the ridge heights on the dwellings fronting this part of West Perry. Given that the proposal would comprise backland development, it is considered that any dwellings on this site should have a degree of subservience to the street scene, and so are considered not acceptable in this instance. Secondly, as you can see from these elevational drawings, another design concern are the low eaves heights of the dwellings of between 3.76 metres for plots 2 and 3 and 4.06 metres for plots 1 and 4, which results in unacceptable large areas of blank render or cladding at first floor level. Third, plots 1, 2 and 3 have front elevation flat dormer windows which interrupt the eaves lines and lead to an unnecessary proliferation of rainwater goods across the front of the dwellings, which would lead to a cluttered appearance. So another concern is materials. So the two left photos that you can see and also the top right are from the street scene on West Perry. You can see that these houses are generally comprise of either rendering or brick dwellings. And to the bottom right is Armstrong Close to the rear of the site. So the units comprise of a mixture of buff-facing brickwork at ground floor level with either render, plots 2 and 3, or horizontal timber cladding, plots 1 and 4, at first floor level. Whilst the combination of render cladding and brickwork is a characteristic of the existing 1960s, 1970s dwellings within Armstrong Close to the north or rear of the development, the proposed units would be seen within the context of West Perry, where more traditional, fully rendered or full brick elevations are prevalent. In addition, the triple casement dormer windows on plot 1 dominate the front elevation and reinforce the appearance of 2 full stories. The large triple casement dormer windows on plots 2 and 3 visually jar with the arrangement of lean-to roofs over the porch and bay windows. Plot 4 will be mostly prevalent within the West Perry street scene, and this is the elevations at the bottom of this slide. The lack of windows at first floor level on plot 4 forms a poor relationship with the street and results in a large area of blank cladding at first floor level. So therefore, overall, the poor design, 2-storey height and incongruous materials are considered to result in a development that fails to contribute positively to the character and identity of the area and would not successfully integrate with adjoining buildings, the routes and spaces between buildings, topography and landscape, and would therefore have an unacceptable effect on the character of the immediate locality and the settlement as a whole. So the second reason refusal relates to heritage harm and relates to the relationship between the proposed dwellings and the Grade 2 listed buildings in close proximity, particularly the relationship between plot 4 and Treetop Cottage to the immediate east of the site and number 29 West Perry, which sits opposite the entrance to the site. So the proposed development, in particular Unit 4, by reason of its close siting, would detrimentally intrude upon the setting of the Grade 2 listed buildings known as Treetop Cottage to the east and number 29 West Perry to the south, and therefore fails to preserve the setting of the historic interest which it possesses. Furthermore, no heritage statement has been submitted as part of the application to allow the local planning authority to assess any convincing justification of the proposal's impact to a designated heritage asset. So the proposal would therefore have an unacceptable effect on the character of the immediate locality and the settlement as a whole, contrary to criterion C of policy LP9 of the local plan. So this slide here shows, I've just outlined in pink, number 29 West Perry, which is opposite the site, and Treetop Cottage, which is the L-shaped building just to the south. And this slide just gives you an idea of the listed buildings that the proposal would mostly impact the setting of. So officers have considered the application. Paragraph 7.36 of the officer report notes that the existing site contributes positively to the setting of Treetop Cottage as an open green space which allows a degree of separation between this listed building and the existing modern housing developments to the north and east and the modern houses at 24 and 26 West Perry. The existing grass, trees and vegetation on the proposal site provide a natural informal backdrop to Treetop Cottage. As an undeveloped space, the proposal site also contributes to the listed building at number 29 West Perry opposite by providing a buffer between the existing modern housing to the north, east and west. So officers consider that the erosion of open land and particularly the siting of plot 4 here proposed by the access road approximately 19.5 metres from Treetop Cottage to the south and 25 metres from 29 West Perry to the west would have a detrimental impact on both the two listed buildings on West Perry and would unacceptably intrude onto their setting or would harmfully conflict with the character of the listed buildings and with the interrelationship with these listed buildings. This unacceptable impact, together with the omission of a heritage statement, results in a less than substantial harm development with no public benefit and so therefore fails to preserve or enhance the identified heritage assets and fails to comply with the NPPF, the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Act 1919 and the HDC local plan. So the last reason for refusal relates to residential amenity and relates to the siting of plot 1 here, plot 1 to the northwest of the site. Local plan policy LP14 addresses residential amenity, which is also reinforced in paragraph 135 of the National Planning Policy Framework. So as laid out in paragraph 7.53 of the officer report, whilst not a policy requirement, a general rule of thumb in terms of amenity are separation distances of 12 metres where side elevations face rear elevations. I've got a little arrow there just showing the 10.4 metre distance between the dwellings. So plot 1 would have a blank side elevation at first floor, which would be approximately 10.4 metres from the rear elevation of the existing dwelling at number 26 West Perry. Due to the siting of plot 1 and the insufficient separation distance, plot 1 would result in a significant overbearing impact to the rear garden and rear elevation of number 26. The proposal would therefore be contrary to policy LP14 of the adopted local plan and paragraph 135 of the NPPF. So to summarise, there are 3 reasons for refusal, which are 1, design, 2, heritage harm, and 3, residential amenity. So members are therefore encouraged to refuse the application in line with the officer's recommendation of refusal, part 8 of the officer's report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will move on to speakers for this particular application. We have one speaker, which is James Dubelieve, who is the applicant. Welcome. And you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. And when you're ready, if you just press the middle button and then it should light up at the top.
I live locally and rent out some rural properties cheaply. Just to set the scene, the site is a piece of waste ground, just under half an acre of old farmyard, which has no amenity benefit, apart from being a popular destination for fly tipping. Our plan is to make better use of a site that currently detracts from the village, to provide low-rise, low-density housing respecting the neighbours, to provide a small pair of semi-detached properties for modest rent to meet local need. I discussed the plan with Perry Parish Council and Village Forum in November and received support from everyone. The owners of Treetop Cottage were at this meeting and have also made a supportive written representation, something that's omitted from your officer's report. I note that highways and other surveys all give the green light. Turning to the design and heritage aspects, I'm pleased that the urban design officer supported the principle of 4 dwellings, together with the arrangements and siting of the units. I wanted my architect to use designs and materials linking the eclectic mix of houses on the main road to the modern houses in Armstrong Close, without being obtrusive. The proposed dwellings are only 1.5 stories high, with lower eaves and much less bulk around the roof than 2-story houses. This makes them subservient, so I disagree with the suggestion that it would be preferable if the ridge heights were lower. Turning to heritage, the nearest period buildings are a fair distance away, and HDC validated our application without requesting a heritage statement. Treetops Cottage has an enclosed back garden without open views. Next door to the east is a large modern house only 3 metres away. By contrast, our plot 4 would be 19 metres away, separated decisively by mature trees, a hedge, and a new fence, and set back out of the sightline of road users. It is evident that there would be no negative impact on Treetops Cottage from plot 4. This, by the way, was the view taken by the HDC planning officer in 2007, who was also very clear and supportive on the question of amenity. To quote, "The view through this site is to the modern properties of Armstrong Close, and therefore it is considered that this view does not enhance the setting of number 26 and the surrounding period properties." So to finish, please support this moderate and sympathetic plan. It will improve the village setting, bring public benefits, and consequently comes with the support of Perry Parish Council and Village Forum.
Thank you very much. Are there
under 3 minutes.
Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you just clarify what you said about the Urban Design Forum? Excuse me. You're saying they agreed to 4 units. Did you? Or can you just clarify what you said about the urban design?
Have I got that right? There was a report from the urban design officer that I think wasn't included in the latest pack, which said the principle of 4 dwellings together with the arrangement and siting of the units is supported in design terms, was in a document from the urban design officer sent to us.
Thank you. It's just on 5.6 on page 11, we've got notes to say the HDC Urban Design Forum objects. Sorry. 5.6.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. And thank you also for keeping so perfectly within your time as well. We appreciate it. Even with a shorter meeting tonight than some perhaps. I just wonder if I can make sure I've understood correctly. In terms of the debate around the height of the building and the relevance of that to the question of subservience to neighbouring properties, do you accept that the application seeks permission for houses that are two-storey in height, and your argument is around the sort of the shaping of the higher parts of the building, or are you suggesting that the through you, Chair, forgive me, or is there suggestion that the understanding presented in the report around the relative heights of the proposed buildings to the neighbouring buildings isn't quite right? Just keen to ensure I've understood your position around height of buildings and with reference to their stories and the point about subservience. Thank you.
So the heights are all lower than number 24, and they are comparable to some of the other buildings around, although the pair of semis is smaller. So it's, they're slightly lower, so they're a little bit subservient, but it's more about the bulk and the massing than actually the height itself.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? There are no more questions, so thank you very much for addressing us. We will move on to questions of clarification for our planners. So, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to clarify that, what's been said by the applicant, at 5.6, it says on our report, HDC Urban Design Forum object with scale and appearance, where the applicant said they approved 4 units. Can you...
So the representation comment I received from the Urban Design Officer on the 13th of November was that recommendation refused. The scale and appearance would be out of keeping with the character of West Perry, contrary to local plan policy, LP11 and LP12 parts A, B and C. It is recommended the application is withdrawn and a revised application submitted based on the recommended changes set out above. So that's the only advice that I received. Can I also clarify that we did have a representation from Treetop Cottage and they did support the application. I think important is that the objection to the impact on Treetop Cottage is from conservation perspective. So what we were considering was the impact to the listed building. So Treetop Cottage said, the hedge referred to at the boundary with 30 West Perry should not be removed. This was planted by us at 30 West Perry in 2017 and is wholly outside of the boundary, which is clearly marked by a post and pig wire fence, stock fencing, which we installed after agreement with a visit on site with Sir Hugh Jubilee in 2017, who was at the time the owner of the proposed site. So just to reiterate, we were considering the impact to the heritage asset.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Maria, I just wanted to go to paragraph 7.17 on page 14, because I know Mr. Jubilee referred to it when he spoke to us just now. It's obviously 2007. He spoke at some length about that, some permission, but I know you explain it later in the report, but I wonder if you could just give us a flavour of what has changed since then. Obviously, new local plan and NPPF. And how does that now mean that application carries limited weight from 2007?
So yeah, we've had the introduction of the NPPF in 2012 and the new district design guide in 2017, which superseded the old district design guide, and also the local plan that we've adopted in 2019. So I would say the key planning policies that we would have assessed the 2007 application or have been overtaken by new policies. So therefore, it's a completely new appraisal that we need to make on the application, especially in terms of conservation, because before the NPPF, we were pretty limited on the weight that we could give impact to heritage assets.
Could you clarify the meaning of subservience, please?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Could you clarify the meaning of subservience when it comes to planning?
So when we discuss subservience, we mean that it should be, it's sort of in a hierarchy, it should be lower, so it should be subservient. Is that right? Yeah? And not to dominate neighbouring properties.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification for our planning officers? There are no other questions, so we will move on to the discussion. Who would like to start the discussion for me? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I thought it was a helpful presentation of the application. Clearly, we've heard a clarification around the unilateral undertaking having been received on bins, addressing the fourth point in the original report. So we're down to the 3 recommended refused reasons. I think it's absolutely clear to me that there could be a planning permission capable application to make use of this site with respect to housing, whether or not it looked like the more of a scale of the earlier 2007 application. But of course, we are bound to consider the particular application in front of us rather than how it might be adjusted. And I'm open to hearing comment from colleagues around the table this evening, but I haven't heard anything that persuades me that the officer recommendation here is not safe for us to adopt. I'm minded to be guided by the report. I appreciate the frustration around the appearance of a different decision now compared with previously, but of course that was an application for half the number of houses, and as we've heard, fundamentally the planning and legislative context has changed. And I must say the height of the buildings as well as the shape of the top of them feels relevant to me in a perception of subservience, not least as depending on what angle you're looking at the building, you're seeing the height rather than the thickness if you're looking at it from the front or rear. So I'm minded not to make a proposal as the first speaker, Chair, but happy to make one in due course if helpful.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this particular application? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. I'm tended to agree with the officers on this one. The problem appears to be plot 1 and plot 4. I see it originally the planning was agreed and passed for 2 dwellings, and in my mind that probably ought to go back to that area somewhere. But plot 4 is rather close, and I don't know whether red roof does it any good or harm, but I think it would make it stand out even more. When I was always taught, when you look at a listed building, and if something attracts your attention before the listed building, then that's wrong. I mean, that's old school. I know it's 20 years ago stuff. Whether that still is the same, but I feel plot 4 would attract your eye a lot quicker than the actual listed building. So that one is a problem. I mean, that one is a no, to me is a no-go anyway. It's too tight. Plot one, as you say, you're explaining that it's too close to number 26, and I do accept that. But I think the only thing that's on my mind is to refuse it and let the applicant go back and put a new design in that's more acceptable without trying to cram. If you look at the road in there, it's quite narrow. There's only really one, it's only one vehicle width. It's very tight. It doesn't do a lot for the village, I don't feel. So I'm inclined to go with the officers on this one, Chairman.
Are there any others that would like to speak on this particular application? Councillor Corney?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to labour this because I think the colleagues here have already said, I think, and I agree with everything they've said. So I'm prepared to propose the refusal.
Is there anyone else that wish to speak or would like to second the proposal? Thank you, Councillor Butler. In that case, we will go to a vote. It has been suggested that we go with the recommendation of our officers to refuse. All those who wish to refuse this proposal, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Those against? Any abstentions? Therefore, this proposal has been refused. We will move on to item 3B on the agenda, which is Offord and Cluny and Offord and Darcy, and that will be brought to us by our planning officer, Maria Rosamond. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, again. So, planning permission is sought for the retrospective change of use to personal, equine and grazing use at Offord Meadow, Station Lane, Offord Cluny. This application has been brought before members as the planning officer's recommendation of approval is contrary to the parish council's recommendation for refusal. The proposal seeks to retrospectively change the use of the land to allow the keeping of a maximum of 10 horses or ponies. The proposal states that no changes would be made to the site boundaries, access roads, public footpath, hedges or trees. Members are made aware that there are some structures on site which are temporary in nature, including tents, some timber structures and a caravan. Whilst these structures are not included in the description, nor are any elevational drawings or plans submitted showing these structures for planning approval. That's not the right one. I've printed off the wrong speed. Okay. So subsequently, these buildings have not been considered as part of the application and therefore are not subject to approval within this current application. A condition is proposed to be added to any approval of the condition which states, within 3 months from the date of this permission, any existing structures on site and not subject to this planning application shall be removed completely from the site. This is to ensure the development recognises the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and to safeguard the site from increased flood risk in accordance with policies LP5, LP10, LP12 and LP15 of the Huntingdonshire Local Plan to 2036. Huntingdon District Council's planning enforcement team are aware that some temporary structures exist on the site. However, members are advised that it is the change of use only that is the subject of the planning application in front of us this evening. So the site here, hatched in black, is accessed off the southern side of Station Lane and comprises a roughly triangular size of agricultural land. The built-up village of Offord Cluny sits to the east on the other side of the train line, which runs north to south on the map in front of you. The pink hatch to the east denotes the Offord Cluny Conservation Area, and the site is approximately 90 metres from All Saints Church, which is a Grade 2 listed building, which is, yes, there. Can you see the cursor? No. It's the one closest, about halfway up on the map. A train line abuts the site on the eastern boundary, which links Huntingdon to St Neots main line and separates the site visually and functionally from the village and conservation area. A waterway runs from the southeast of the site along the eastern boundary, which then runs centrally through the site. River Great Ouse runs to the east, going north-south. Also running east-west through the site is a footway linking the site to Offord Sluice. A footpath runs north-south along the western boundary, and a footpath runs east-west through the site. You can just see that black line that runs about 3/4 of the way down. Opposite the site are some commercial uses. There is open land also opposite the site, and the continuation of River Great Ouse. So this is an aerial view of the site showing the parcel of land. It mainly comprises of grassland with some sporadic trees to the centre of the site around the waterway. The site is fronted by post and rail timber fencing with mature trees and hedges, which also runs along the western side. The site is within Great Ouse Valley Green Infrastructure Priority Area and is classified as Grade 4 agricultural land. It is important to note that the site is agricultural in use and character, and so would not significantly change as a result of the proposal for a change of use to equine personal use and grazing land for up to 10 animals. The proposal has been reviewed by technical consultees, which are found in Chapter 5 of the Officer Report. No objections were raised in terms of environmental health, highway safety, impact to the public right-of-way, Environment Agency and Network Rail, subject to conditions and informatives which are recommended to be applied to any consent given to the application. So the main constraint of the site is that it falls within the Environment Agency's Flood Zone 3B, here denoted by the pink area, as identified by the Huntingdonshire District Council Strategic Flood Risk Assessment 2017, which also locates the site within a 30-year extent for surface water flooding and over 75% chance of groundwater flooding. So next are my site photos. So here I am, I'm standing here looking towards into the site and site access. You can see just in the background there the train line and the trees separating the site from the built-up area. You can also see the Grade 2 listed church there, just the tower of it, just coming through that tree. And sort of looking into the site. And this is looking to the back of the site. And looking right. And this is a gate that's to the west of the site, to the front. So the next picture will show me just walking down this. This is the Great River Ouse to my right. And this is looking towards down to the site where there's some temporary structures at the moment. And again, just another site, photo of the site to the end, to the rear. And looking into the site to the rear there. So Offord's Parish Council and the lead local flood authority have objected to the proposals. The lead local flood authority object due to a lack of appropriate site-specific flood risk assessment and surface water strategy. Next. And the Parish Council have concerns that the proposal would be in a high-risk flood area and that the submitted flood risk assessment is insufficient to show that flooding has been adequately addressed. So while it is acknowledged that the site is in a floodplain and is subject to flooding events, officers consider it unreasonable to refuse on the basis of the quality of the submitted flood risk assessment, given that the proposal is for a change of use to keep up to 10 horses or ponies on the site only, with no physical changes occurring on the site, and that the site's agricultural character would be retained. So on the 12th of March, the following late representation was received from Offord's Parish Council. And they say that they recommend rejection of the application as there was not a full flood risk assessment made, and that remains the situation. Overall, we are not against horses being kept in the field, but we feel it is important that the committee understands the full situation. The land is part of the bank and floodplain for the River Great Ouse and lies within the Environment Agency's 50% annual exceedance probability outline, meaning that there is a greater than 50% chance of it flooding in any given year. The applicant has already put a number of lean-to buildings, sheds and a caravan on the site, as well as lengths of fencing which cross the line of river flow when it is in flood. The Parish Council is concerned that these will impede the river in flood, so potentially making it worse or get washed onto the road. The land has flooded at least 3 times this year already, and on the first occasion, the emergency services had to be called to help rescue the horses being held in the field at that time. So this representation has been considered, and officers are aware that the site is in flood zone 3 and there are structures on the site within the red line without planning permission. To reiterate, these structures are not part of the formal application, and the application before us is strictly for the change of use only. As stated in the beginning of this presentation, these structures can be conditioned to be removed within 3 months from the date of any permission given to the application. Therefore, refusing the application on lack of flooding information or potential flood risk would not form a defensible reason for refusal in this case. The proposal is in the countryside and will retain its countryside use and character, and as a change of use only, it is considered that it would be unreasonable to refuse the application, as there would be no significant additional flood risk to use the land for equine grazing and sighting of horses and ponies. Subsequently, members are invited to approve this application in line with Officer's recommendation for approval, subject to conditions, as outlined in Section 8 of the Officer Report, and the additional recommended condition outlined at the start of this presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have one speaker for this particular application, which is the Ward Councillor, Councillor Sarah Comboy.
Good evening, councillors. I wanted to address you to express concerns, but I've already heard from your officer's report that you have a lot of that information in front of you this evening. Fundamental concerns are around the use of this land. Whilst I am fully supportive of land for grazing, and it seems almost every week there is a post on Facebook looking for new grazing land in our towns and our villages, but particularly in this part of Huntingdonshire. I'm not a keeper of horses, and I was somewhat surprised by the sheer volume of auxiliary storage and temporary buildings that appear to be on this site. I'm minded that if in granting a change of use enables officers to then condition how this site is used, that potentially would be favourable, because it's that auxiliary support buildings and storage that give me the greatest cause for concern with this site. As you've heard from the Parish Council, there's already been one evacuation, but Offord has been subject to a number of surface water flooding and river flooding events in the last 2 years, and these seem to be becoming more common in the history of this particular location. I am concerned around the fencing on the site in terms of whether it does in fact impede water flow, and flooding occurred in Station Lane, which in fact is adjacent to this site. I'm not suggesting for one moment it was because of the auxiliary fencing on the site, but I really would like you to be mindful of that. So if you were to approve it this evening, please do bear in mind that the removal of those structures will be paramount from giving local residents the confidence that this site will be used appropriately but will not put their own homes at further risk. I would ask you to also consider whether anything can be done about the entrance to the site, because as you've seen in the photographs, the additions to the 5-bar gate do not make it an attractive entrance to the site, but I'll leave that in your capable hands. I think that's all I really wanted to say, and I think that probably covers most of the points the parish council would also wish me to have shared on their behalf. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you for joining us this evening. And we'll move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer. Are there any questions of clarification for our planning officers? Councillor Gorson.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. 5.7 talks about Network Rail not having no objection, but the final part was to have a sufficient stock-proof fencing in place to prevent any livestock getting onto the railway. There isn't anything currently at the moment, and I will say that I thought that the fencing at the front of the site onto the road was dire as well, especially if you've got horses going around there. So they put that in. There isn't anything in the recommendations. I don't think it's necessarily enforceable, but I just want to know a horse on the railway would be very dangerous and cause all sorts of problems.
Thank you. So tonight, as part of the presentation, you had a condition put in front of you about the removal of all structures within 3 months of the date of this permission. Clearly, with your support, we can take that away and look to amend that where necessary to have regard to appropriate fencing. For the avoidance of doubt, under the Town and Country General Permitted Development Order, fencing up to 2 metres in height is permitted in certain areas, and that could apply here. But if you're happy to delegate that to myself and officers tonight, we're happy to look at that and reword that condition to reflect the opportunity for the applicant to clarify fencing where it relates to, say, the railway or to the road network, for example, but then continue to take away perhaps the theme of the buildings themselves and their removal. So we would welcome further steer from the committee tonight on that. Thank you.
Councillor Tevlin.
Thanks, Chair. So my concern is with particularly the representation that said there has already had to be an evacuation already. Do we know if there's any plan from the applicant for mitigating if there is a flood? What happens to the animals? My concern is with the horses, actually. I know it's beyond planning, but has the applicant got an extra item to mitigate that? Thank you.
Hi, so part 8 of my officer's report recommends a condition for the evacuation of animals in flood risk events. So we would ask the applicant to submit that after approval given, if it's given.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I was going to ask around the possibility of conditioning fencing onto the railway. It's Councillor Coulson's picked up already. Thank you to officers for the earlier answer. So my remaining question is just, given that we normally, or indeed always, take very seriously flood risk with respect to planning and the relevant rules, I just on the face of it, clearly we understand the argument presented here around the unreasonableness of that in this case, but I just wonder if we could be walked through the policy basis of us feeling entitled to conclude that we might support planning permission when the lead local flood authority's formal consultation input is to recommend refusal, just so we're confident about making a decision contrary to the lead local flood authority's input, please.
I just want to answer what I can on that. So this would be comparable to having livestock on the site. So as agricultural use, the applicant could actually put cows on there and flood risk wouldn't be an issue. I think we just need to remember that it's the use of the land that we're looking at, and putting animals on the site wouldn't in itself increase the flood risk. So from that point of view, it was just, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's like, it would be unreasonable to refuse it on flood risk grounds, given that it would just be used to house animals.
Thank you. If I may briefly, I suppose it's just understanding what question we think the lead local flood authority thought they were responding to in recommending refusal. Then I was conscious from the text of the email put up on the screen, it sounded like perhaps they weren't entirely clear what the scope of the application was. So it's just trying to resolve that disconnect, because the reasonableness point strikes me as fairly clear, at risk of straying into the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. And it is a helpful question. The lead local flood authority, or LLFA, it's not incumbent on them to think about how land could be used alternatively. They will come at it through their legislation in terms of any use of that land. However, when it reaches us as the local planning authority, we do have regard for what lawful uses could take place on that land without the need for planning permission. As Mary rightly points out, if this was a farmer turning out a head of cattle, for example, it would not need planning permission from us. So with that in mind, we have consideration to, for want of a better phrase, a fallback position. So in all our actions and our recommendations, they must be reasonable. And for that reason, we've had regard to the fact that animals could lawfully be grazed without the need for planning permission. And then furthermore, to the point of the LLFA, the substantive point about flood risk, clearly, as Mary has pointed out, there is a raft of conditions that we look to impose so that in the event further structures were required to support this commercial business, as identified as not agricultural, then they would need to come through the planning system and be considered on their own merits.
Thank you. Councillor Hassel?
Thank you. I was really just following up on the point from Councillor Wakeford, and he almost made the point I was going to make anyway. I guess what I would really like, though, is the clarity of what the local flood authority is actually asking for. So what is their concern? And I accept, and I'm very supportive of all the conditions that we've talked about, but I'm slightly concerned that we might be missing a condition in terms of, are they concerned, for example, of water coming from this particular site, backing up and flooding houses externally? So some clarity as to what their condition, their concern is, just in case we might be missing a condition in terms of future use, whether it be for cattle or horses or whatever. But I accept the argument that you made in terms of they could put cattle on it and it wouldn't be sitting here today. So respect that. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the question. So I'm just looking at the LLFA response, and they say that paragraph 167 of the NPPF requires planning applications to be supported by a site-specific flood risk assessment. Such an assessment should include a surface water strategy and must demonstrate that the proposed development incorporates sustainable drainage systems, or SUDs, unless there is clear evidence that this would be inappropriate. So the SUD should take account of advice from the LLFA, have appropriate minimum operational standards, have maintenance arrangements in place to ensure an acceptable standard of operation for the lifetime of the development, and where possible, provide multifunctional benefits. So just to go back to the point that there's no development on the site, it would just be for the siting of animals. So therefore, a surface water drainage isn't required because it's not necessary, because there's no development, additional development on the site.
Sorry, just to come back, it's, you know, if it's just they are following the rules, it's just that I know particularly this area, and it's quite a sensitive area in terms of flooding, and the concern from my perspective is that if something happens on that particular piece of land, if it's just that they're following the rules of, yeah, you ought to have a SUDS on the site, I totally accept your point. It's right. It's just clarifying whether there's anything else that's missing that we're just not aware of. But we can only judge what's on the paper. So.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan. I think that final remark you made actually goes to the core here. The bit, if I'm completely honest, I'm unclear on is what weight they have given to the presence of the temporary structures on the site. Picking up on Mary's point, this is an application for a change of use of the land. There is no form of development proposed. And dare I say, your concerns obviously are very relevant in terms of impact on future flooding or housing, but there would be more that we could attach to that if there was going to be a physical form of development. The land itself is not changing. So therefore, the degree of risk to the houses is not changing from the substantive premise in front of us, which is the change of use of the land only.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think this has been an interesting debate. Actually, I thought it would be a relatively quick item, but it's been quite detailed, and that's necessarily so. And I think the suggestion by Councillor Goulson on 5.7 was an excellent one, just to pick up on the fencing and make sure that is secure. And if we can do that by condition, I think that would be good. And I think Councillor Hassel's made some good points here, and Clara was able to respond and confirm what we're talking about, a change of use here. So we're not talking about additional development. I can understand the parish council's concerns here. I think they were right to highlight it, and that's what we're here for. But I would like to propose that we approve the officer recommendation, please.
Okay, thank you. I will take that proposal. Are we still on the section of clarifying questions to the planning officer? That's fine. Are there any other questions of clarification for the planning officer? Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. This is more from Councillor Conboy's point of view, really. So asking a question on her behalf, because I know she raised the point about there's temporary structures at the moment, and whilst I know this is not about those, but she did actually ask the question about or raise a point about whether if this was formalised, whether that would help sort of monitor and I can't think what word she used really, but to give the HCC some more weight on what happens with those buildings, and we can sort of police them as such. I don't know if you can remember back from what Councillor Conboy said.
So just to respond to that, there at the beginning of my presentation, I proposed a condition that all the structures on the site would be removed within 3 months of the date of the permission. So we would, if you were to approve the application, we would append that condition, and that would be subject to enforcement action if the applicant didn't adhere to that.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, if I can just clarify, clearly that condition we're going to take away and look at in light of differentiating between the fencing, as we discussed, adjacent to the railway and to the highway, and then, as Mary said, we would then revisit that in the context of the buildings. What I would add as well is we'll add the condition If the applicant does want to come back with a planning application, they can do so. It does not prevent them coming back with an application with all the full details, and that will be considered on its own merits at the time at which it's before us.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification before we go into the discussion? No other questions of clarification, so we'll move on to the discussion. Who would like to continue the discussion? Councillor McAdams.
Thank you, Chair. For me, all the different questions seem to have been covered. One of my concerns was, although it doesn't seem to be a material thing, but nevertheless it's a consideration anyway, is the welfare of the animals. So I'm pleased to see that in the recommendations, the evacuation of animals in flood risk events is provided for, and the limited use of the animals which are going in there. I think all the different bases have been covered, and I think that the officers have got it right, and therefore I would like to support Councillor. I've gone blank. Tom. I'd like to Tom's. I'd like to support Tom's proposal and second it. Thank you very much. Tom Sanderson, it's all right. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to contribute to the discussion before we move on? Councillor Hassel.
Just as a discussion point, I don't know much about horses, but I was they needed some sort of stabling area, that they just couldn't remain out in the open all the time. So in terms of the condition that we're putting in place as part of this, do we think that it may reinstate itself? Is that a practical condition for horses? I'm not an expert in equine matters.
I'll just bring in our planning officers.
Thank you. And while I don't profess to be an expert, I am aware that horses can live outside in the UK climate all year round. You may notice when you drive past fields, you'll see horses wearing rugs, for example, just like people and our coats, different thicknesses for different times of the year. So I would not suggest that that is a matter that we need to take into consideration this evening. And furthermore, if the applicant had livestock that did require stabling, as mentioned earlier, they can come forward with a planning application for stables on their own right at the right time.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors that wish to contribute to the discussion? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think it's very important because the place looks a mess, doesn't it? Let's face it. And it's very important that existing structures are removed, and conditions, as you've said, adequate fencing, and the railway have said stock-proof fencing, which there is a difference. You can get all sorts of fencing. So along the railway side particular, but I mean, I'll leave that to your recommendation on the conditions. So this is the sort of land that years ago it would have been on a summer grazing licence. You don't really want animals on there in the winter anyway, but you know, if you're given, there's nothing else you can do. Probably the applicant owns a piece of land, so there's nothing you can do about that. But all it does, it just overloads our team when it comes to you know, making sure that they adhere to the rules and move them off in poor conditions. So I'll leave you to word that however you want, but thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. So we will move on to the proposal. So it's been proposed that we add an extra, we change the wording of the condition that was put before us, and that we ensure that that this can be delegated to our planning officers, and that it's amended so it reflects the fencing and the structures within that piece of land. Are we all happy with that amendment to this proposal? Okay. So we will go ahead with the proposal put in front of us with the different condition. All those that are for approving this application, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Those for, those against, and any abstentions. Therefore, that has been approved. Thank you very much. We will move on to item 4 on our agendas, which is the appeal decisions, which will be brought to us by our planning service manager.
Thank you, Chair. 2 appeals this month, both allowed. The first one was allowed and dismissed. It's a split decision. Apologies to members with regards to that. And that application related to a certificate of lawful development. So the inspector took a different view in relation to the time the actual play equipment had been on site. The second one was a refusal of a garage to the front of a dwelling, of which the inspector took a different view to the planning officer in relation to the impact that had on the street scene. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our agenda. So I'd just like to thank you for your contributions, and thank you very much to our planning officers for all the hard work that you do. Okay, thank you very much.